Absolutely smitten. Chapter summary. Aaliyah and Nino team up to orchestrate a dramatic reunion for their favorite couple, only for Adrian to exceed all expectations and thrill Marinette to pieces. Adrian gives himself a stern talking to for greeting Marinette way too excitedly, only to find himself unable to shake an uncanny awareness of her closeness. Later, Adrian finds himself worrying about his next encounter with Ladybug. Could he end up blurting out his feelings for her if and when his heat gets bad enough? Maybe it's better if he tells her sooner, on his own terms. Did you just whisper in her ear? Words she only dreamed to hear. Pretty lady, look at how he's smiling, I think he likes you. But it's too late, you believe in fate. You're absolutely smitten, you'll never let her go. Dodie, absolutely smitten. Thursday, September 1st. Marinette had resigned herself to the fact that she would probably be going to school the next morning with exactly 0 hours of sleep, but if it had happened that way, she wouldn't be currently groaning like a zombie with her eyes glued shut with sleep. Luckily she had remembered to set her alarm on her phone, so she wouldn't end up sleeping through the day, but she couldn't think of any reason to drag herself out of bed. Marinette, your alarm's been going off for 10 minutes. Her mother called. You don't want to be late your first day. Well, I don't wanna miss catching up on my beauty sleep, how about that? Marinette, wake up. Chirped Tiki, who was currently patting Marinette's cheek with a tiny paw. You wouldn't want to miss class with Aaliyah and Adrian, would you? Dot dot dot. Okay, maybe my beauty sleep can wait. Eating breakfast and getting out the door into the fresh air helped wake her up somewhat. She grumbled over the walk to school being 3 times as long as the walk across the street to her middle school had been, not because her athletic endurance was bad, but because she was starting to miss her bed already. It turned out to be worth it, however, upon finding her assigned classroom and letting herself in, she was greeted by a familiar scream of excitement. Marinette. Get over here, girl. Before she could move, Aaliyah had her in a bear hug. We're in the same class, again, hell yeah. She crowed. I am so psyched. Marinette agreed, hugging her back. Now I know this year will be a good year even if Chloe's in our class, too. The girls separated and grinned at each other. Aaliyah leaned in and stage whispered, yeah. Unfortunately, she is in our class. She came in earlier, but she left again to go wait outside the school for Adrian. She'll probably have her dad threaten the principal if he isn't in the same class. Would it be awful if I was secretly grateful for that? Marinette asked sheepishly. If I couldn't ask him out last year with him in our class, I don't have a chance this year if he's not in our class. Aaliyah suddenly smirked evilly. Oh, don't worry about that, she drawled mysteriously. Besides, she added, it's not just me. Most of the old squad is back, with only a couple of new people. I'm glad for that, Marinette said. I'm all for making new friends, but graduating to a new school felt so much more intimidating than just changing classes. I was really hoping to have some familiar faces to look forward to. Me, too, Aaliyah agreed. Her phone dinged at her, letting her know she had gotten a text. She immediately whipped it out and unlocked her screen. She seemed very excited about something. Who are you texting? Marinette asked, craning her neck to try to see. Nino, Aaliyah replied, sounding way too innocent. I have him on a secret mission. He's letting me know that he's successfully intercepted and captured the target. She scrolled through something on her phone and hit a key. Marinette could hear it calling someone. What? Marinette asked nervously. What kind of secret mission? You're about to find out, cackled Aaliyah. She brought the phone up to her ear. Agent DJ, this is Agent Lady Blogger. Are you in position? Marinette gaped at Aaliyah, completely baffled and a little nervous at the way Aaliyah was leering maniacally at her. Roger that. Aaliyah continued after a pause. Everything's in position on my end. Operation Lovebirds Unite is a go. Proceed. She hung up. Marinette briefly considered running for her life. Aaliyah spun her around by the shoulders and covered her eyes. Hey. Aaliyah, what are doing? What are you and Nino plotting? A surprise, Aaliyah stated simply, steering Marinette back out into the hallway. Wah. But where are you taking me? I just got here. Heh 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 heh, you're not the only one who just got here. What does that mean? Just relax, don't resist, and trust me. She stopped, forcing Marinette to a halt. Oh, Marinette. Marinette recognized Rose's voice. Hi. Julka and I are in your class, with Aaliyah and Nino, too. Isn't this great? Why do you have her blindfolded? Juleka's voice, sounding curious. To prevent her from resisting capture, Aaliyah responded. Is anybody going to tell me why I'm being captured? Marinette asked. Before she could receive an answer, however, she heard Nino's voice approaching from down the hallway. Trust me, dude. All will become clear in due time. If you would stop talking like that, I wouldn't be so suspicious. At the sound of this familiar voice, Marinette's heart suddenly decided it wasn't happy sitting still, and started fluttering against the inside of her ribcage. Oh god, oh god, oh god, I'm not ready for this. This isn't fair, I need warning and preparation for this. I'm going to pass out. And, stop. Nino stopped walking, his prisoner doing the same. Excellent work, Agent DJ. Aaliyah praised. We've succeeded in capturing them alive. And now, for the final step. Aaliyah. Marinette croaked. Wah. Is that? Adrian suddenly spoke, his voice trailing off. Marinette could almost believe. He sounded as dizzy as she felt. Please let me survive this. She prayed. Is that you, Marinette? Adrian asked, still sounding a little breathless. Marinette was extremely glad he couldn't see her swaying in place. Why, yes. She squeaked. It's me. As if on some silent signal, Aaliyah took her hands away from Marinette's eyes, and Marinette prayed. She wasn't blushing as obviously as she felt like she was. Because there he was. Her one, her only, her sweet, sweet Adrian. And the expression currently on his face, eyes wide and jaw slack, in surprise, looked so much like what her face felt like, minus the glowing blush, of course that. Her knees almost buckled. Rose and Julka. He didn't even notice them. The next thing she knew, Adrian had broken into the biggest, most blinding grin she had ever seen. On him, picked her up around the middle, and spun her around with a laugh she hadn't heard from him since exactly 1 year ago. I can't believe it, we're in the same class. Adrian laughed. What are the odds? He set her back down and pulled back enough to look at her again, while Marinette remained hyper-conscious of his hands on her shoulders. You have no idea how much I hoped you three, at least, would be in my class. This is amazing. He paused to catch his breath, while Marinette desperately tried to restart her heart. I never realized before just how oblivious he is to what he does to me, Marinette thought vacantly. I guess that's a good thing until I get my act together. Adrian blinked several times, still gazing at Marinette like she held the secret to everlasting happiness. Then, he seemed to suddenly remember his manners and backpedaled too quickly in a panic, releasing her shoulders and dropping his gaze. His hands actually flailed in midair for a second before dropping to his sides, and, while it wasn't the easiest to spot against his warm and sunny complexion, there was a blush blooming across the bridge of his nose. Uh, sorry, I guess got a little too excited there. He raised a hand to scratch the back of his head. Excuse me. Ah. No, no, it's fine. I'm fine. Don't worry about it. I, I didn't mind. I. She was about to correct herself again, worried that saying, I didn't mind, was a little too much, but she shut her mouth before she could and tried to smile, deciding she would leave it out there. She really hadn't minded. Okay, I'm glad. Adrian hesitantly smiled back, and Marinette internally gave herself a hearty pat on the back. Well, Nino and I couldn't be happier to see you liked our surprise, Aaliyah said with a satisfied nod. Rose and Julka are in our class, too, Adrian, as you can see. Adrian started and suddenly noticed Rose and Julka. He immediately greeted them sincerely and enthusiastically, but all Marinette really noticed was that he didn't pick either of them up and spin them around. Maybe this month won't be such a disaster after all, she thought. After joining the rest of her class, Marinette sat down next to Aaliyah behind Nino and Adrian. Would it have been pushing it if I had wrapped my arms around his neck while he spun me? She wondered, staring dreamily down at the back of Adrian's head. I wish I had at least smiled at him. Or laughed instead of just gaping in shock. Hopefully, he doesn't regret doing any of that because I told him I didn't mind. When he and I are finally a couple, we'll do stuff like that all the time. It'll be amazing. Aaliyah reached across the desk and nudged Marinette to catch her attention. Wah. Girl. Aaliyah hissed. Tell Me that what I saw this morning between you and Adrian actually happened, because I totally forgot to record your reunion. Did he, or did he not, pick you up by the waist and spin you around? He did. Marinette squeaked back. I can hardly believe it myself, but he did. Oh my god, Aaliyah. I thought I was gonna pass out. And he sounded so happy. I'll say he did. Aaliyah whispered excitedly. I've never seen him that excited. I haven't heard him laugh like that, ever. Aaliyah was gesturing excitedly and her eyes were flashing, the way they did when she got a big scoop. I mentioned it to Nino, and even he was surprised. Girl. Do you know what this means? No. What does it mean? Marinette breathed, squeezing her fists and leaning forward eagerly. What does it mean, Aaliyah? It means this is the year. Aaliyah hissed. If not the semester. I'm calling it now. You, my dear, are going to be Adrian Agreste's girlfriend before final exams, and you will be banging him before graduation. Aaliyah. She gasped. Geez, could you announce that a little louder? I don't think Adrian's father heard you. Aaliyah just started shaking with suppressed laughter. Don't tell me you wouldn't love it if it came true, though. She choked, shooting Marinette with a finger gun. Oh my god, I am so getting you a congrats on the sex cake. No you are not. Marinette hissed, making an X with her arms. I will bury your head in the cake if you even try. It is my right as your best friend and wingwoman to give you a congrats on the sex cake, and you cannot stop me. Aaliyah crooned, smirking. You may as well just resign yourself to this fact. I really do appreciate you rooting for me, but I don't think school is the best place to talk about me banging Adrian, Marinette replied flatly. And even if no one hears, and all I end up doing is just silently fantasizing about banging Adrian, I don't want to risk anyone catching me doing so. And seeing my expression. You realize you just said the phrase, banging Adrian, out loud yourself twice, right? Aaliyah pointed out. Marinette scowled and turned bright pink. Besides, I think I've known you long enough that I've probably seen your fantasizing about banging Adrian face at least once, and you'll be glad to know that it doesn't look much different from the rest of your fantasizing about Adrian faces, dreamy smile, blushing cheeks, and the occasional sigh. No big deal. Well, you already planted the image, so I guess it's too late. Anyway, Marinette grumbled. Atta girl. Aaliyah chuckled. Great, Marinette thought, pouting. Just great. Well, now I know what I'm thinking about for the rest of today. Thanks, Aaliyah. In truth, she couldn't stay mad for long. She probably would have spent most of the remaining periods thinking about Adrian without Aaliyah's help. He was sitting one row below her and one seat to the side, which meant she could almost see the right side of his face as he looked forward, and see his entire right profile when he looked in Nino's direction. It was serendipitous. I would like to thank all the gods and goddesses and miscellaneous guardian spirits of love and happiness and future boyfriends. Thank you ever so much for Adrian Agreste. Tilda. When the lunch bell rang, Chloe lunged at Adrian and tried to convince him to eat lunch with her in the cafeteria instead of going home, but he delicately pulled his arm out of her grasp and told her that his father wouldn't approve. I need to at least get his permission beforehand, and then maybe I'll be able to eat lunch here at school sometimes, he said patiently. It's not like you'd be having lunch with somebody he doesn't know, Chloe said, scowling. He knows I'm not going to kidnap you, or something. If I don't go home for lunch today, all he'll know is that I didn't come home when I was supposed to, and while I'm probably at school, I could have been kidnapped or something, he pointed out. He'll get mad at both of us if I stay for lunch, Chloe, and yes, your father may be the mayor, but I don't think my father's been intimidated by anyone in his life. That has nothing to do with this conversation, but, whatever, she said carelessly. I'll see you when you get back. Yeah, sure. Since she was also going home for lunch, Marinette trailed a ways behind Adrian as he left the school and got into the Agreste family car to be chauffeured home by his bodyguard. Once he was out of sight, she walked herself home, a dreamy smile on her face. Tilda. When the final bell rang, there was the expected shuffle and scramble of people gathering their things and filing out into the hallway. Marinette didn't immediately move to do the same, but just sat and watched Adrian with her chin in her hand as he tucked his tablet into his messenger bag. He was taking his time gathering his things as he listened to whatever Nino was saying to him. He stood up slowly. And then he turned and looked up at her. She instantly sat up a little straighter, her expression turning starstruck. For a brief moment, he stared back, his wide-eyed expression difficult to read, curious, intrigued, mystified, even. Then the spell broke, he smiled and waved at her. It was his normal, polite and friendly smile, except, if Marinette had been paying just a little more attention, she would have noticed how his shoulders weren't fully relaxed, that his chin was tucked slightly down instead of tilting slightly up. It meant he had to roll his eyes up higher than usual to meet her gaze, and the result made his expression ever so slightly bashful. But Marinette was too busy internally screaming to notice. He waved at me. And off he went. Marinette was still grinning awkwardly and waving long after he and Nino left the classroom. Quote dot dot dot. Well, somebody seems very glad to be in the same class as you, Aaliyah remarked. He waved at me, Marinette whispered, only half listening. He looked at me and smiled at me. And waved at me. That he did, said Aaliyah. And by next semester, you two will be kissing hello every morning. Secretly in some quiet corner or empty classroom or cleaning closet, of course. Wait, no. Marinette, control your thirst. I dunno if Adrian is into PDA or not, though, Aaliyah, he would probably have to be extra careful not to engage in PDA because he's a model and his father's company is world famous. You would think so, Aaliyah mused, except he totally picked you up and spun you around like you two were in a musical in front of me, Nino, Rose, and Julka. Marinette had no comeback for this. She could only stand there frozen in shock, her eyeballs bulging. But you're right, Aaliyah continued. You two will have to scope out some secret meeting places for your midnight trysts. Aaliyah, no. Or maybe you'll just sneak into each other's rooms. Aaliyah, oh my god. I bet his bed is huge. Kids loaded, after all. Stoop. Blonde boys were going to be the death of her, it seemed. Tilda. As he sat down next to Nino in the classroom, Adrian felt like he needed to give himself a lecture on proper social behavior. Just because you haven't seen Marinette in a while doesn't give you an excuse to pick her up in a hug around the waist and spin her in a circle. She might be your friend, but she's not your girlfriend. And even if she was, you can't get carried away like that in public. You are the son of Gabriel Agreste, and your father would not approve. It was probably because of how over-enthusiastic he had been in his greeting of Marinette, but even after entering the classroom and sitting down next to Nino to wait for lecture to start, he couldn't shake this kind of subtle but ever-present awareness of Marinette sitting behind him. It was difficult to describe, even to himself. He wondered if being able to feel someone's eyes in you was similar to this. On the now rare occasions when he ate dinner with his father, for example, he could almost feel his father exerting a subtle but almost tangible pressure on his own personal space, even from on the other side of the long, cavernous dining room. He could keep his eyes down on his plate the whole time, and still feel his father's intimidating presence. This was like that, except he had been sitting in a classroom along with about 20 other students, each contributing to the subtle buzzing of the room's atmosphere. When he was sitting next to his best friend in a classroom full of people, why would Marinette's presence stick out to him so much? He couldn't hear anything she was doing behind him, nor had she done or said anything out in the hallway that was notable enough to stick with him, except maybe the fact that she hadn't minded his over-enthusiastic greeting. At least I didn't freak her out too much, at least I don't think so. She said she didn't mind, so, no harm done, I guess. Remembering how warm and affectionate her family and home felt, he thought that maybe Marinette was used to receiving more hugs in general than he was. The thought made him smile. It was easy to see where Marinette inherited her kindness. Having finished scolding himself, he tried to concentrate on lecture, but the whole time, he could still feel her sitting behind him. It was subtle, and only slightly distracting, but it was new. A new awareness, a new sensation. When the bell rang for lunch, Chloe had predictably tried to get him to stay to eat lunch with her. And he had to explain to her why he couldn't, even though, of course, he was positive she already knew. She hadn't changed at all, it seemed. And, as far as he could tell, Marinette hadn't changed much either. She was still the same sweet and klutzy girl who sometimes stumbled over her words that he remembered from middle school. Also, remembering also how creatively talented she had been in middle school, he could only imagine the things she could do now. So then, what was it about her now that was nagging at him? Again, it was probably all on him. His subconscious just wasn't ready to forgive him just yet for his social faux pas. And since Marinette was the one who suffered it, the fact that she was sitting right behind him was nagging at him. That was all. Returning home for lunch was a free opportunity to clear his head with a change of scenery. Familiar scenery, but different from school, where Marinette had been sitting right behind him. Once he had finished lunch, he realized that perhaps he should have concentrated on enjoying his food as deliberately as possible to help himself not keep thinking back to Marinette. It wasn't that he couldn't stop thinking about her, she just kept popping up in the back of his head, gently requesting his attention like a purring kitten touching him with a single paw. It wasn't anything worth worrying about, just intriguing. So, when the final bell rang, he had found himself turning to look up at her as he stood from his seat. He couldn't have told you what he expected to see, but she just drew his gaze, like a ladybug, landing on an important note he hadn't noticed. She was still sitting at her desk, her cheek resting on her hand when he caught sight of her. Her head jerked up out of her hand and her eyes widened as soon as realized he was looking at her. Caught, Adrian had immediately smiled and waved at her, hoping that was enough to make him not look like he had been staring at her like a weirdo. She seemed to buy it. But he had been struck by the sudden realization that she was, actually quite pretty. Not at all a strange thought to have. People had their types, but the standards by which conventional beauty was measured weren't all that varied. If they were, fashion models would be as motley a group as the rest of the human race. He felt that, as a model himself, he could attest to this. Adrian was a sensitive, humble boy, and you would never catch him boasting about the fact. That pictures of him could be seen all over Paris, but, honestly, he would have to be really down on himself to think he wasn't handsome, plain and simple. Thus, he felt that it was indisputable that Marinette Dupin Chang was likewise a very attractive human being. Dot dot dot. Ah, do you even hear yourself, Adrian? You are really overthinking all of this. Just stop worrying about it. It's just Marinette. Needless to say, by now he was starting to worry a little bit for his mental health, just a little bit. Tilda. Even after he got home from school, he was still preoccupied, but at least he was alone with Plag. In his room where no one could witness his awkwardness. Taking advantage of the free time he had before dinner, he got on his computer and brought up the Lady blog to see the latest on his end. Ladybug's feats of heroism, as far as the public knew, anyway. Even though he had seen and participated in it all in person, it was fun to see it all from a third-person point of view, especially when he got to watch Ladybug save Paris from multiple angles. Alia's latest video, of the two of them confronting Summer Fi, was one of the more underwhelming posts. Alia had recorded the footage from very far away, and so the viewer couldn't see what was happening at all. He and Ladybug hadn't even engaged Summer Fi in any form of combat, so there wasn't much to see. He was actually glad Alia hadn't been able to catch anything he had said to Summer Fi on camera. He would prefer that nobody hear him sweet talk anybody other than his lady. Speaking of his lady, it may have only been one day since he had seen her last, but it had also been one day since he learned that the two of them would be entering their mating cycle, and even though he dreaded the inevitable embarrassment, he wanted to talk to Ladybug about it so he could hear her thoughts. Maybe her Kwame had told her something that Plag forgot to tell him, or maybe she an idea or two of her own for how they might deal with it. Either way, he also wanted to know if she was as worried as he was about how the mating cycle might affect their ability to work together effectively as a team, or how it might trouble their relationship in general. He wanted to reassure her that, no matter what, his loyalty to her would not be shaken, and that he believed in her loyalty to him in turn. He also really just wanted to see her, and maybe give her a hug if she was okay with it. The problem was, they had no way to contact each other when they weren't both superheroes, and so if Hawkmoth decided, for some reason, to not akumatize anyone for a while, he and Ladybug wouldn't be able to meet to talk about their situation. What if Hawkmoth went a whole week without akumatizing anyone? That would be 1/4 of their mating cycle past. How far along would their symptoms have developed by then? Would it even be safe to talk to Ladybug at that point? Hey, Plag, he called, spinning his chair around to look around his room for his Kwame. What should we do if Hawkmoth doesn't akumatize anyone soon? I mean, don't get me wrong, it would be nice for Paris to get a break, but eventually, won't it be too risky to try to meet Ladybug? Plag emerged from inside Adrian's pillowcase. Even if Hawkmoth didn't give you two anything to do for a week, you should still be okay to talk for a bit. Since you won't have seen each other until then, your symptoms wouldn't have developed much. That's a relief, I guess, Adrian said. How bad would we be by then, exactly? Hard to say for sure, Plag said thoughtfully. Wanting to see Ladybug really badly. That's for sure. Constantly thinking about what you two could be doing if only you were alone together. Adrian's imagination instantly supplied him with examples of exactly what Plag was referring to. He felt his face turn bright red. Quote dot dot dot. Which would lead to twice as many bothersome erections for you, probably. TMI. Adrian yelled, covering his ears. TMI. And a lot of restlessness for Ladybug, too, Plag added. She'll be in basically the same situation as you. That would also be TMI, Adrian mumbled, blushing even harder and feeling very disappointed in himself for where his imagination was going. Would Ladybug find herself lying awake at night, staring at her ceiling as she thought about him? The way he did about her so often already. Would she imagine what it might be like to kiss him? To snuggle up together in the same bed and fall asleep in each other's arms? Would she try to imagine what it would feel like to touch each other's bare skin with their bare hands? Adrian felt the flush on his face trickle down his neck to his collarbone, and a shiver ran down his spine. Did Ladybug have any inkling of an idea of what she did to him? Even after all this time, he didn't know if she thought his flirting was just him playing around with her, or if she knew he genuinely, sincerely liked her. She kept things between them light-hearted but business-like, and if she had any idea of how deeply in love he was with her, she was depressingly good at hiding it. Maybe she thought it was just a silly crush and nothing more. He had wanted to tell her how he really felt about her for the longest time, but somehow or other, he just hadn't been able to make it happen. He had come so close to telling her on Valentine's Day last year, but if he remembered correctly, Dark Cupid had chosen that moment to interrupt, and he had ended up taking one of his arrows and being brainwashed into hating Ladybug and trying to take her down. Somehow or other, Ladybug had saved the day as usual, of course, but by the time the spell on him had broken, they had both already used their superpowers and had to go their separate ways before they changed back. He hadn't had the nerve to try to get her to stay long enough to hear his confession. At least she hadn't held against him whatever horrible things he had said to her during the fight. Would Ladybug feel any differently about him if she knew exactly how he felt about her? The last thing he wanted to do was make things awkward between them with a confession of love that wouldn't be well received. But what if that was all that was holding them back? What if all he needed to do was take a leap of faith? No, stop that. He scolded himself. This month is the worst time for you to be getting your hopes up. For no good reason. Any other time, maybe, but not during the mating cycle. It wouldn't be right. But could he keep his true feelings to himself until it was over? If it got to the point where he started throwing himself at her feet and begging for her permission to ravish her, as Flag said he might, then what would stop him from declaring his all-consuming love to her in the process? Not telling her he loved her more than life itself would seem like a lie of omission by then. Would it be better to tell her the truth before he was no longer of sound mind? Flag, he called again, staring down at his knees. What do you think the odds are that I'll blurt out that I love her because the mating cycle is messing with my head? Ooh, that would be something, wouldn't it? Flag remarked, not sounding nearly worried. Enough, in Adrian's opinion. Something like 80% if you two are lucky and your symptoms don't get too bad, more like 90% if you two are fighting supervillains every other day. Oh, God, Adrian buried his face in his hands. And she'd eat it up, too, Flag added. Probably say the same. Wait, what? Adrian looked up and stared at Flag in confusion. But how could she trust my state of mind at that point? Wouldn't she try not to take me too seriously because the mating cycle was messing with my brain? No, because it would be messing with her brain, too, Flag pointed out, gesturing with a paw. Hearing you say you love her with every fiber of her being would be music to her ears, and she'd probably beg you to take her right then and there. Oh, fuck, he croaked, trying and failing miserably to not visualize Ladybug pinning him against a wall, kissing him senseless, and commanding him to make her his. So you're thinking it might be a better idea to tell her before you start yowling for her love? Flag asked. Excuse me, yowling? Adrian asked, running his fingers through his hair in a nervous tick. You know, meowing plaintively at her like the tomcat you are to try to get her aroused. Oh my God, what is going to happen to me? Adrian howled, standing up and gripping his hair. Like he was about to rip it out. Flag, she's going to be terrified of me. No, she won't, Flag deadpanned. And you don't have to worry about that part for a while. I'll tell you about every feline tendency you'll develop when your symptoms get bad enough. Until then, Just concentrate on managing your urges. Adrian took several deep breaths, trying to calm himself down. This month was going to shed years off his life. So, he finally asked hesitantly, do you think I should tell her how I feel? Your feelings are going to influence how you react to your symptoms, so it's only fair she knows how they might affect you, Flag replied. Unless you think it would just upset her, I'd say do it. Adrian released his grip on his hair and heaved a deep sigh. Okay, he said lowly. I just hope she's in an okay mood when I see her. It was the heat of the moment. Chapter summary. Ladybug and Chat Noir's opportunity.